Welcome to Murder Most Foul, a podcast devoted to exploring famous murder cases of our time. Some solved, some unsolved, but all fascinating and guaranteed to raise the hairs on the back of your neck. I'm your host, Jim Solanowski. Today's episode: Son of SaM, The Lost Tapes.
In New York, the search continues for the .44 caliber killer who has come to be known as the Son of SaM.
The summer of '77 won't be easily forgotten by New Yorkers. For one thing, there's a killer on the loose. He calls himself Son of SaM, and during the past year, he has killed 6 people with his .44 caliber revolver. Police say they are nowhere near solving the case.
As I was walking around for somebody to harm or kill, I just walked up to this one car and just started shooting the gun.
That last clip is from one of several recordings made in Attica prison of David Berkowitz, better known as the Son of SaM. Recently, there has been a rebirth of interest in the case in the form of documentaries, many subtitled The Lost Tapes. Luckily for us, the tapes were never lost. They were recorded by Rochester, New York Democrat and Chronicle reporter Jack Jones, and thankfully are still in his possession. Jack, a repeat guest here on Murder Most Foul, joins us today to share his thoughts on David Berkowitz and the murders that gripped New York City in the summer of 1977, hyped by the tabloid media.
I guess I worked for the Rochester Democrat and Chronicle from sometime around 1970 till I retired in 2005. And after the riots, which I think were in 1971, huge slaughter of inmates and guards and prison employees by these overzealous state police who just came in like ICE agents with high-powered rifles and shot anything that moved, and then tried to blame all the killing on the inmates, who I think wound up killing a total of 1 of the guards, and everybody else was killed by state police. There were a lot of prisoners that I sort of stumbled into through a counseling group at Attica, who were vets who kind of forgot to stop killing and doing bad shit when they hit the streets and came back home without any sort of decompression or what they call it, debriefing. It wasn't like the World War II guys who went over as a group and came back as a group. You know, we were pulled out and, dropped back into society individually. So a lot of those guys had a lot of scars from it. I did so-called military intelligence work. I was a Navy cryptographer, but the guys who did combat were pretty scarred. And so I did a big series on the, at that time, very high rate of incarcerated veterans inside Attica prison. So I was actually on very good terms with probably one of the best prison superintendents in the New York State prison system at that time. His name was Harold Smith. And he authorized me to work undercover inside the prison for a few weeks and write a series of stories on mental health in the criminal justice system. They got a lot of attention, and a lot of the inmates read them very closely, particularly one guy who had just been assigned to Attica prison after pleading guilty to serial killing and murders that terrorized New York City back in the late 1970s. Called himself at one time the Son of SaM, David Berkowitz.
In a neighborhood of the Bronx called Pelham Bay, and in Forest Hills near the famous tennis club, the killer has struck 6 times since last summer, and 5 are dead. Most of them pretty young women, shot at close range on the sidewalk or in parked cars.
David read my series on mental health and criminal justice. He wanted to meet with me. He wrote me a letter. I showed the letter to my editor, who said, "Holy shit, what are you going to do?" I said, "I'm going to go meet with this guy." So I did. I was a bit hesitant. I'd never met anybody that high profile, either, on any level. I mean, this guy was maybe next to Charles Manson murders. And in Berkowitz's case, he was quite a Ginsbergian level poet of the gutter who, so I also, being on very good terms with the warden at that time, after I did a couple of newspaper stories, actually, I think it was only one newspaper story, which ran on the same day that this American athlete, Eric Heiden, had won a bunch of Olympic medals. And the newsroom editors played my Son of SaM interview above the Eric Heiden Olympic story. And a lot of readers were outraged that we should be, I guess, profiling a notorious serial killer at all, even though it was an exclusive story that nobody else had. I wrote it from the standpoint of learning what we could learn to maybe identify a copycat somewhere down the line sooner. So my motives were clear, but we had a real weasel for a manager, an executive editor at the newspaper at that time, who bent to the criticism of the guys at the country club and the tennis club about the fact that they didn't want to read about a mass murderer. They wanted more about Olympics and suburban coverage and all that kind of garbage. I continued to go visit with Berkowitz in prison, and I had a little German UHER tape recorder. So for a period of several weeks, I met with him, and he told me his life story. And one thing led to another. I was going through a divorce at the time. I had the tape transcribed. Had forever intended to write the book to set the record straight. Shortly after that, who shows up at Attica prison but Mark David Chapman? And I wound up striking up an acquaintance with him through a counseling. And you know how that story turned out. I wound up writing the book about John Lennon's killer, Mark David Chapman. Life got busy, life got weird, but I kept my David Berkowitz interview tapes all these years. So finally, 45 years later, I guess it was only 40 years at the time, a guy who tracked me down and knew that I had written a book about the John Lennon murder and wanted me to be part of a movie he was doing, came here, did the movie. I had just finished I just beat back cancer the first time then. And in the process, he discovered that I also had these Son of SaM interview tapes. And he said, "Oh my God, we can do something with that." Got me working again on my old David Berkowitz material. And we found out that these 40-plus-year-old reel-to-reel tapes were still excellent quality. And it was Berkowitz telling his own story from his childhood right through the murders. and he said he would find somebody to do something and get a project going on that.
So, Jack, tell us about the first interview that you had with Berkowitz in Attica Prison.
I don't think I said anything as dramatic as, why the fuck did you do this? What the hell is the matter with you? I wanted to establish just a groundwork. I mean, I was, for one thing, he is such an otherwise normal, outgoing, seemingly friendly person. That was very disarming from my perspective. So we began talking in very general terms before I began asking questions about. And then my first question was along the lines of, well, you asked me to come visit. What should we talk about? And he actually kept trying to steer me to this issue of the prisoners and some of the guards he had talked to who had survived those bloody riots. And he was getting on the bandwagon of trying to get justice for the victims of this state police slaughter at Attica Prison. And so I said, yes, that's absolutely a noble and great goal. But I also want to know something about you and the reasons that you're here. And I'd like to learn as much about your childhood. I know that you're a veteran. You're an Army veteran. I'm a Navy veteran. We both served during the Vietnam War, although neither one of us spent a lot of time in Vietnam. He was stationed in Korea, although he really wanted to go to Vietnam and, become a hero killer there.
Just in case my audience might be a little fuzzy on the facts of the Son of SaM case, why don't you tell them why David Berkowitz was in Attica at the time?
He was in Attica after pleading guilty to 13 violent attempted murders over a period of 13 months in New York City, which came to be known as the Son of SaM killings after he began taunting police under that fictitious identity, creating this whole demonic persona, which of course riveted the tabloid press and television journalists at that time who were covering the aftermath of these bloody shootings that were happening all over the New York City area. They thought that, they were confined to one area and then he would move, somewhere else. It was crimes of opportunity. And through my interviews with him, one of the first things I discovered as he talked about his mother, who had dumped him to be adopted, I think probably without ever holding her own child in her arms, had given him up. He was told by this wonderful family who adopted him that his mother had been this angelic woman who was his father had been a good man who wanted the best for him. And his mother was this angelic woman who died giving birth to him. And he knew, it seems like instinctively, even though he was taken from the hospital by the adoptive family when he was only 3 days old, that something wasn't right. This couple were observant Jewish couple, New York City business people. Both were military veterans who served in some capacity during World War II. And he looked different. I mean, his biological heritage was very much Italian. His real name would have been Richard Falvo, but his name on his adoptive birth certificate was David Berkowitz, which is very, very Jewish name. And he grew up in that culture. His cousins rejected him as someone who was different from them. And after he got out of the Army, he went to this adoption freedom agency to try to track down maybe his father, who might be still alive, he thought. And they asked about his mother, and he said, oh, she died giving birth to me. And he said, they all laughed. He said, what do you mean? This is tragic. He said, man, that's what they told all of us. So he did an amazing, thoroughly researched every phone book, newspaper you could find going back to the time of his birth, and tracked down his biological mother, who turned out to be a horrible woman. His father had been a married businessman who became very angry when she couldn't get an abortion, which was illegal at that time, but insisted that she put the child up for adoption. And he had been, well, say a bad kid, a behavioral problem would be putting it mildly. An arsonist since, maybe the age of 5 or 6, setting random fires. He would sabotage his mother's cosmetics and clothing. Just a really recalcitrant, even though he was a fairly good student, he was smart. He was always in trouble of some kind.
One of the things that, someone might say up to this point, that the parents witnessed most of this, and they did take him to a psychiatrist, psychologist, whatever was of the day. And it was, they do puppets and all that kind of stuff now, but this particular one had toy soldiers, and he had a cap pistol. I recognize it from my youth. It was not a real gun, a toy gun, but a cap pistol. And he was sort of instructed to sort of tell the therapist, who the soldier was, and he would shoot it, go bang and knock it over.
Yeah, she put a gun in his hand when he was like 7 or 8 years old, and would put up these little toy soldiers and say, okay, take out your aggression here. Don't be attacking other kids in school. And she would put a little toy soldier figure in front of him and say, who is that? And he would say, that's Jeffrey, and he would shoot Jeffrey and knock him over. So that's the wrong message you want to give a kid. You can deal with your aggression even symbolically by putting a toy gun in their hand and setting up a toy human being and blowing them away. So that was something that got planted in his mind at a very young age. And according to him, he had this rage that he was born with. He had this, this violence toward the world. He said over and over again, I was really a bad kid. I was really a bad human being. And I knew I didn't fit in. He never had any really close friends. He never had any confirmed sexual experiences with any women. He was incompetent at relationships. In a given social setting, he could put on a good act. I think the most telling thing about his social skill is that while he was working at the post office, he interacted with the other men and women who were working there. And on lunch breaks in the cafeteria, they would pick up copies of the Daily News or New York Post and these big headlines about this latest Son of SaM letter to the police or to Jimmy Breslin, or just the headlines and the pictures of the bodies lying there covered up, and make comments like, this guy has to be a real monster. And the women were terrified to walk, at night when their shifts ended, to walk to their cars. So while they're talking about what a horrible person that the Son of SaM character must be, he would say, he's probably just a guy like you or me, and they said, you're crazy, man. I mean, we're like normal people. No normal person could do something like that. And you just go back to, his lunch.
And there was an eerie man on the street interview at the time, which sort of echoed this concept that he could be a normal guy.
I think this guy's very intelligent. I think he's very crafty, and I think that during the day he acts just like everybody else. He goes to work, and nobody can pin this guy down. He could be the guy around the corner from you, for all you know.
And on numerous occasions, he would walk these frightened women to their car, but he was truly a Jekyll and Hyde character. The whole time he was driving the streets of New York looking for young women alone, or ideally a woman and a man in a car in a sexually compromising situation where he imagined he had been created, this unwanted child, who was a product of pure lust between two really bad people. He was looking for his mother and maybe his father also, symbolically.
And did Berkowitz agree that that's sort of, at least indirectly, why he was picking and the victims that he was picking to shoot?
Well, he was, and I asked him directly. So what you were doing, David, is you were, in your mind, you were killing your biological mother over and over. This woman you had gone through 25, 26 years of life thinking had died giving birth to you, and there was this man out there that you said was angry because you had killed his wife just by being born, and it was all your fault that this woman died, and you'd been told a lie for all these years, and you saw that as the source of your inability to ever fit in, and of this rage that you had no idea where it was coming from. And you were getting some kind of sense of revenge by killing these people who you confabulated in some way were symbolic of your mother, your biological mother. He also carried the guilt of losing the wonderful woman who was his adoptive mother when he was 14 years old. She went to the hospital and he didn't think it was serious, and he had done horrible things to her. He had poisoned her pet birds, her parakeet or canary. He would break off her lipstick out of the tubes, put toxic cleaning chemicals in, pet food, and rip her clothing or hide it so she couldn't find it. And he felt, at the age of 14, well, I've killed two women. One by being born, and the other one by creating so much stress that she died in the hospital of cancer, which, and of course that's nonsense in both cases. But when you have a mind like, some people are born to rage more than others. Some people never, I also work with chimpanzees in Africa, Dr. Jane Goodall's people at a rescue center. And there is something about the male primate, and we're really closely related to chimpanzees. And in our species and in the non-human primate species, we males tend to have a gene that's more, prone to murder and mayhem than in general females do. And he had that gene in spades.
What is interesting also that it goes back and forth. I mean, that's the Jekyll and Hyde is a good, metaphor. Is that he alternately felt he was useless and yet wanted to make a mark. Wanted to be that's why. I mean, he cut out the newspaper clippings and kept them. He didn't keep them in scrapbooks. They were all over this awful hellhole that was his apartment. But so the oddly, and this isn't the first person, Bundy, they're all like that. They're feeding on the media. So the media is feeding it. That gives it more media, and that feeds it more because that's what he wanted. A lot of times, like Bundy was sexual. Also, a lot of the murders, it has to be personal. They want to see the face of the person they're killing and be there as they die. That was not him. He was at a distance. In fact, I think there was a time where he had first started thinking in the beginning about a knife, but that was and he actually assaulted someone with a knife, but that's too close and too personal. This way, he didn't see them, so they weren't, someone he knew came up to a couple that were stuck on the snow, and because he helped them out of the snow, that became a personal connection, is tenuous, and then he had his gun, and he could have killed them right there, but that he tells it in one of his tapes that he could not bring himself to do that because he had formed this bond.
Right. But it seemed like any time that he was close to becoming a monster, if someone smiled at him, anything to trigger that normal human wave back, say hello back, smile back kind of thing, he couldn't act. And you mentioned that first attempted murder with a knife, and it was just too up close and personal. I mean, he had the woman in his arms. Fortunately, it was winter. She had a thick coat on. It was around Christmas time. And he stabbed her like 6 times, but this thick winter coat she had on saved her life. And it was after that he went to Texas, where you could buy, and still can buy even guns even easier today than you could then, and wound up with this .44 Bulldog firearm. And came after seeing the movie Taxi Driver with his army buddy there in Texas.
You talking to me? You talking to me? You talking to me? Well, then who the hell else are you talking? You talking to me? Well, I'm the only one here. Who the fuck do you think you're talking to? Oh, yeah? Huh? Okay.
So where does Son of SaM, that starts the whole concept. That's still where he's killing. Then even afterwards, we get into Satan and we get into there's more than one son of SaM. But let's go back to, for my audience, where did the moniker that he perpetrated on the media, and they picked it up. It's great because they had no name to put it. They called him the 44 caliber killer. That was good. That was okay. That was a nice headline. But Son of SaM, that's much better. So he wasn't Son of SaM. Neither one of his fathers was named Sam. So where did Son of SaM come from?
Sam Carr was unfortunately this, neighbor, just a regular guy who had a dog, big black dog named Harvey, that barked a lot. And Berkowitz had moved to that apartment in Yonkers, I believe. And he had moved there after shooting a dog at another apartment that barked. Barking dog was like, he looked at me and said, "Man, have you ever lived close to people who had a dog? You ever known a dog that just barked and barked all day?" He said, "There's nothing worse." You know, it was literally driving me crazy. I mean, it was crazy anyway. So this guy, SaM Carr, dog, he felt was driving him to do more killings by, he'd come home from his late shift working at the night shift sorting mail at the post office, couldn't sleep because the dog barking, during the day, try to sleep, the dog barks. So he just fantasized himself as this monster created by this guy's dog, and that it drew all of these satanic inferences into it. And he knew that he didn't want to be this crazed killer, so it had to be the devil making him do it, right? So somehow he twists the devil into the dog as being an agent of Satan and SaM Carr, because he was the poor bloke that owned that dog.
And we shouldn't gloss over that actually it was one of SaM Carr's children that was instrumental in ultimately catching the son of Sam.
Sam had 3 kids. One of them was a daughter whose name was Wheat Carr, who worked as a police dispatcher for the Yonkers Police Department. And when the police finally tracked him through a parking ticket that was way on the other side of, New York somewhere, and he lived in Yonkers, and this the police are discussing it. It was SaM Carr's daughter who made the connection. Wait a minute, Berkowitz. That's that crazy lunatic that lives across the street from my father. He shot our dog. He put all these threatening notes on our door. So that's what finally, led the police to them.
Good evening. David Berkowitz, 24 years old, a postal worker, walked out of his Yonkers apartment last night, turned the ignition key in his car, and found himself surrounded by police. "Well," he said, "you got me." Police say those words ended the biggest manhunt in New York City history with the capture of Son of Sam.
I was sitting on the street side, so the 2 New York City detectives weren't able to really see him clearly. They kept asking me, "Is he going to the car?" And I said, "Well, I can't see yet." There were 2 vans parked in front of us. And I said, "It looks like it. He's opening the door." I said, "I think it's him. Let's go." We jumped out of the car. I rushed up to the car. I yelled to him to freeze, that we were the police. He put his hands up. He opened the door, got out of the car, put his hands up. He was then cuffed by New York City. We then put him in the unmarked car and took him down to Yonkers PD.
And this is what they say tripped up the .44 caliber killer, a parking ticket. David Berkowitz drove this cream-colored Ford Galaxy from his home in Yonkers to Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, early on the morning of July 31st. He parked in front of 290 Bay 17th Street. Then police say he went to stalk his 12th and 13th victims. But in the place he parked was this fire hydrant, and police had the lead they needed. Jeff Kamen picks up the story from there.
After more than 13 months of following thousands of leads down endless blind alleys, the detectives of the Brooklyn Omega Squad, part of that 300-cop .44 killer manhunt, captured the man they say is Son of Sam.
I'd have to go back and read Jekyll and Hyde, but my memory is that I'm not sure if Hyde and Jekyll knew, in other words, if they were really, it's fiction, they were distinct personalities, and I guess whether they knew about each other. But both in Chapman's case and in Berkowitz's case, he didn't present to you or the police or anyone that he didn't know what was going on. And, when he was normal, he didn't know what this other thing was. I mean, it was always there in him, the desire to go out that night or whatever. It just, he didn't, except for, maybe dogs barking or something, getting him more and more anxious, maybe, and more, more adrenaline. But he never, to you or anyone, claimed that I didn't do that, this other personality did, or Satan did it. He never, even though it was out there and it's part of his persona, he never blamed Satan, or did he? At any time, did he try to mitigate his?
He played that card with some of the court appointed psychiatrists and psychologists, and Chapman did too, and to law enforcement, acting out. And in one case, Chapman went through an episode where he was supposedly demon possessed and frothing at the mouth, and they had to shoot him down and, take him and put him in a straitjacket and Thorazine and all that stuff. But both of these guys, I interviewed them after they had been through, chemical treatment and psychotherapy. And I caught them in their more lucid moments. And both were trying to use the notoriety from the crimes to prove that they're really not bad people, that they were just caught up in a maelstrom, not entirely of their own making. And Chapman has and continues to try to reach out through this prison ministry to people who might be in the situation he found himself in, a psychic rage he couldn't control. And it's, it becomes all about staying close to Jesus. That's, and these guys are easy converts. There are all these prison ministers who, go around to the various institutions, whether it's Tate LaBianca murderers, who all became, I think all of them became God-fearing.
On these horrible cases that, and I don't want to be flip, but it's true, you wish they'd found Christ before they did all this. Finding Christ after might be good for your soul, but it certainly didn't help these poor victims. But, so just to clear up, do you think from talking to him that the ticket and all that, he did put that there on purpose to get caught?
He was taunting the police. The taunting of the police came later after he began getting the publicity. And the more publicity he got, the more intense and brazen the taunts became, dropping the letter at one of the crime scenes to this investigator Borelli, and writing directly to them, I think to the police commissioner, and of course his well-known letters to Jimmy Breslin that Breslin played up to the hilt to sell a gazillion copies of the newspaper.
Mr. Breslin, sir, don't think that because you haven't heard from me for a while that I went to sleep. No, rather I am still here, like a spirit roaming the night, thirsty, hungry, seldom stopping to rest, anxious to please SaM. I love my work. Now the void has been filled.
So, Jack, you've detailed how you came by Berkowitz in the prison, and that led to your taping the many interviews with him. Why don't you give us a little more information of how you got involved with Chapman in Attica?
Chapman was interviewed by I think People magazine reporter for a big series they did soon after he wound up in Attica. But it was 10 years later that Chapman agreed to sit down with me and work on the book. I had gotten to know him and had several meetings with him, and I kept my word. I said, this is all off the record. It was a long process of getting to know Mark David Chapman. And after 10 years, when everybody in the world, Dan Rather and everybody in major media figures from all of the top newspapers and everything wanted an interview with this guy. I get a letter from him saying, "Could you please come and meet me at Attica? I would like to talk to you." And he gave me this one, like, 2-sentence statement. I'm sorry that I killed John Lennon, da da da. Jesus and all this stuff. And I said, "Mark, you've known me for 10 years now. If you're really serious about this, you are remorseful and you've learned something about yourself that might help other people. We need to sit down and do a long series of interviews and think about writing a book about your." He said, "I'll pray about it." He prayed about everything. And he got back in touch. With Berkowitz, it was more like, he had read my stuff on mental illness and criminal justice situation, and he began opening up to me from the first meeting. We talked a lot about, I shared stories about my background, growing up dirt poor in shithole Alabama, and he talked about his childhood, and him on one side of the table, me on the other, and my agreeing that, given my early life circumstances, I could have been on the other side of the table talking to somebody else. I think there's a little bit of those guys in all of us. There's a little son of Sam in every one of us. Thank God I was able to, struggle out of that. Thank God in the U.S. Navy, where I got really good schooling and training so that I could look forward to a career doing something other than my Ku Klux Klan kinfolk down in Alabama, Literally, one of my first memories is my wizard something uncle taking me to a cross burning when I was 4 or 5 years old and being terrified. I knew something evil was going on there. Didn't have words for it, but so I think that's another reason that I gravitated to covering a place like Attica Prison, where there are guys who didn't successfully deal with that monster that maybe some adults not intending to plant in our young minds.
And do you think ultimately Berkowitz was happy or maybe just relieved when he finally did get caught?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can see that in his face. There's this, weird little twisted smile on his face as the police are leading him into the police cell. The photographs, the film reels from his arrest, and when all the jackals of the press show up with their mini cameras and everything. Yeah, and he, for one thing, he knew consciously or not that he was going to be getting some kind of psychiatric attention, which he knew he needed, but he wasn't going to go get it himself. And he also knew that he was famous. I mean, Chapman, as much as anything, killed John Lennon just to try to steal John Lennon's fame, to be somebody. Chapman didn't want to die without being known for having done something in life, even if it was something horrible. He talked about Hitler. Hitler was horrible, but everybody knows who Hitler was. Me, I'm just this, overweight. I screw up everything, stumble bum kind of guy. They both get off inside the prison system notoriety of all the press they got that was created as a result of their horrible acts against society and by taking the lives of other human beings. In Berkowitz's case, it was multiple people, and in Chapman's case, it was he intentionally sought out Lennon. Well, he had a childhood connection.
In addition to Berkowitz and Chapman, you did come across other inmates who wanted you to help them with getting their story out. You want to mention anybody else at this point?
Well, One of them was Jack Henry Abbott, who scared the living hell out of me. Jack Henry Abbott, he's the guy that Norman Mailer succeeded in getting out of prison, and then he went on to commit another wanton murder. Abbott wrote a book called Belly of the Beast about life inside prison. He was a genius, a madman, murderous genius. I did some interviews with him until I realized how infectious he was. He was manipulating me to try to do things, on the outside. And at one point, all these alarm bells went off in my mind that I'm not as smart as this guy, This is going to wind up being something incidentally that's going to result in something horrible happening to somebody else that he's trying to put me in touch with through other people on the outside and inside the prison system. Whoa, we're done, Jack.
It's like, that's it. No. So, Jack, in case my audience has not had enough of David Berkowitz, a.k.a. Son of SaM, with the newly interest in it that's out there with documentaries, in your mind, how can they, get more stuff on Son of SaM?
If you want to know more about the Son of SaM killings, the best source, I mentioned my friend Bill Badgley of Molasses Manifesto. He narrated and put together a series on those tapes, which is what led to the Netflix project. But our podcast is Killer Tape. And it's 21 episodes, and there is so much more direct from David Berkowitz's own.
Jack, do you have a website, or is there a way people in the media or fans like me could get in touch with you directly?
No, I don't have a website. If anybody wanted to email me, they could email me at Jack Jones, all one word, at frontiernet.net.
So, Jack, I want to thank you again for joining us today on Murder Most Foul and sharing the interviews that you recorded, sharing with us the lost tapes that were never, ever lost. And I do want to point my audience to the book that you wrote on Mark David Chapman, the assassination of John Lennon, that is entitled Let Me Take You Down. And there is a earlier podcast that you and I did on that book that I entitled Imagine. And that's on my website. You can look at that, listen to that. It's great. So once again, from the bottom of my heart, thanks, Jack Jones. So I'd like to thank you folks for kindly tuning in for another episode of Murder Most Foul. If you liked what you heard, I hope you'll tell your friends. Information about the podcast and an email link that can get a message to me can be found at the podcast's website, the address being www.murdermostfoul, all one word, no caps, no spaces, .com. So, until we meet again, stay safe, and for God's sakes, don't murder anyone.